Nation of Fitin10, welcome to day 28. We are 4 weeks in officially now. 4 weeks in, so what does that make us? 40% of the way. And of course, I've got a bunch of scans to run tomorrow, so I'm looking forward to those. So we'll see how everybody did. And I just want you to know that this is only one point in the challenge, right? This does not dictate necessarily how you will do in the challenge. I've seen many times people do well in the beginning and not so well in the end, and I've seen people do not so well in the beginning and do really well in the end. And of course, I do see people who do well all the way through. So, remember, the past does not dictate the future, and of course, we are ironing things out as the challenge goes on, right? You're learning more, you're getting better with your food, and for a lot of you, that was in the last week or two, all right? So just keep that in mind. This morning I had a question, and basically the question was phrased in such a way that the person asked me, well, it was something to the effect of, my muscles are really sore, and I can't take any supplements, and so my muscles tend to be more sore. This person's doctor has recommended them not taking supplementation because this person is pregnant. And really what she was saying was she's getting muscle cramps. Her calves are cramping. And anytime you get muscle cramps, this is due to not enough water and or electrolytes, all right? So we really want to make sure that we get enough sodium. Primarily, sodium's obviously going to be one of the number one electrolytes that we lose through perspiration. We want to make sure we get enough sodium and potassium and calcium and chloride and zinc and a few others in there as well, okay? Primarily, though, when we're sweating, we're losing a lot of sodium. So you want to make sure you get sodium in your diet. And the pink sodium is really good because the pink salt is really good because you get the other trace minerals along with it. But if you're really serious about getting in your electrolytes, get a good electrolyte mix like the one I carry by ATP Labs. This is Electrolytes XL, all right? And this will make a big difference, especially not just with cramping, but with having feelings of energy. Well, energy is not the right word I'm looking for here. What's the word I'm looking for? I can't think right now. I'm doing this video late at night. Basically, it will give you the feeling of being able to keep going. All right. You will feel like you have more stamina. That's the word I'm looking for. Stamina. Okay. That's one thing you'll notice more than anything. Typically, if you're working out or you're going for a run or you're hiking and you notice you feel sluggish or you don't feel like you have energy, this is more often related to dehydration. So water, not enough water and or electrolytes. So don't just think water and or electrolytes, okay? So when it comes to cramping or feelings of sluggishness or lack of energy, more often than not always, but more often than not, it's due to lack of water and or electrolytes. So just keep that in mind. Okay. Question about fasting. Okay, I'm probably going to talk about this now. Well, I'm going to talk about it now, and I'll talk about it more probably tomorrow. So really what we have to ask ourselves is so the question was from yesterday, I read it out, is fasting, well, let me just read the question here because I've got it. Does intermittent fasting work? All right, so how do we define fasting? Well, fasting really, when we're talking about it, generally we're talking about abstaining from caloric intake. But sometimes fasting also includes, like, you can't have tea, you can't have coffee, even those things don't really have any calories. But let's just talk about calorie restriction, all right? So what does fasting mean? Am I fasting if I haven't eaten in a couple hours? Well, sort of, except, we still probably have food that's digesting, so not really. Really, when we're talking about fasting is we're talking about we haven't eaten for a prolonged period of time, and we're going through gastric emptying, so we really have no more food digesting and entering into our bloodstream. And depending on the types of foods we eat, this is going to take some time, right? Obviously, if we eat meat, this is a slower digesting food. If we're eating something like a refined carbohydrate, this is going to be super fast digesting. So it just really depends on what you're eating. But for the sake of this, let's talk about a few different we'll call it time restricted feeding, okay? Or you could call it fasting. So some people do 12 hours, some people would go 16 hours, some people go 20 hours. And we've heard about extreme ones, I'm sure you probably have, 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours. And so does it work? Well, I guess the question is, work for what? So if we're talking about fat loss, it's definitely not something I would recommend for fat loss. Now, that being said, some people will do something like every day they'll fast for 16 hours and only eat for 8. And what that does for them is it just by default lowers their daily calories because their window is shorter and they just don't end up eating as much. And this is why it works. There's nothing not magical about not eating for a certain period of time. It's just usually people will eat less. If you've tried fasting for that period of time, but you ended up eating more, you're gonna gain weight. All right, so it's really just about the amount of calories. Now, one thing I wanna just stress here is that, you can, to a certain degree, make your body, and we'll just talk about eating food here. We won't talk about weight training or other methods here. You can make your body more or less energy efficient. All right, so one way to make your body more energy efficient, that is, it will expend less energy, that is to reduce calories, especially for an extended period of time. So just keep this in mind in future, right? So, there's a happy medium with creating deficit, right? And then losing some metabolic inefficiency. Right, so we don't want to create too much of a deficit. This is why I give you guys a happy medium of calories. A lot of people think lower calories are better. And yes, they might be better in the short term for fat loss, but we have to think about the long-term ramifications, right? So I just don't like intermittent fasting personally for fat loss because generally it's not a long-term solution. So, ultimately, when I think about a long-term solution, I think about getting as many calories as possible and getting a full spectrum of foods. Like, to me, that's going to be the most sustainable. All right? Going with a method where you're restricted or you're cutting out foods or you're going through a period where you're really, really hungry or, you're restricting yourself only to a certain subset of foods. These are things that tend to be not as sustainable, right? So we always want to think about sustainability. And again, in my mind, lots of calories, as much calories as we can get while maybe still losing some weight, and variety, right? We want some variety in there. All right. Now, obviously in this challenge, I've got things like you weighing out your food and, trying to stick with real whole foods. And this is still something I'm going to really, really encourage you to do. And I will tell you through my experience, not just personally, but with working with other people, especially those who are very committed for the long term, that when you start to eat more real whole foods, especially when you start to institute things like eating protein at every meal, etc., protein and fiber, you'll find that your blood glucose management and your cravings for carbohydrates, your cravings for sweets will go down through time. And this is what numerous people have told me over time as well. So just keep that in mind. So when it comes to fat loss, does it give you any advantage? Only if it's restricting your calories. All right, but you always have to ask yourself, what are you going to do long term? Is this something you're always going to do long term? Okay, now when it comes to other things like gastric emptying, well, we kind of already touched upon that. We'll maybe touch upon that tomorrow. Or perhaps the reduction in development of certain neurological diseases or cancer and stuff like that. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Because certainly fasting has some benefits in that regard, okay? So we'll talk about that tomorrow. I'm going to wrap this up because I'm nearly 10 minutes, and I really don't want to do that. Let's just get to the message of the day. And the message of the day is you cannot lose in trying. You cannot ever lose in trying. The only time really you'll lose is if you stop trying. But you can never lose in trying, right? And this is sort of leading into our week 5. I guess you could call it theme of the message theme for this upcoming week. But you cannot ever lose in trying. The only way you're going to lose is if you stop trying. So just keep that in mind. Positive energy, positive vibes, believe in yourself, for the love of God, give some gratitude, and I'll talk to y'all tomorrow.